All right, by my clock, it is 5 o'clock, so we're going to convene the Utility Service Board meeting of Monday, April 10th. The first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from our last meeting of March 27th. Are there any questions or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Right. The minutes, approval of the minutes passes. The next item on the agenda are the approval of claims. First are the standard invoices with a total of $830,282.46. Are there any questions on the standard invoices? Jeff?
Two questions. The first, there's 3 items from state of Indiana for audit services. You had that flagged. Just if someone could provide a description of the value that the state of Indiana is providing for us for these 3 audit services.
These are required by the State Board of Accounts and were handled through the Controller's Office. State Board of Accounts hired the auditors. So that is out of our control. It's directed by the Controller.
Oh, so these are for independent auditors that are appointed by the state.
These are annual audits.
Thank you.
In the past, the Board of Accounts did the audits, I believe, in-house, and they've now outsourced it.
Yeah, I didn't recall seeing these before.
Yeah.
Thanks for the explanation.
And I just have a follow-up question on that one too. And it says it's for the audit of 2020, so are they generally that far behind? Just, or,
They have been since I've been here. It sounds like the auditor that they hired ran into some challenges. And there was a change from us being more accrual-based accounting, and so there was more checks. And so it took the auditors a lot longer than they expected to get through the audit itself. So we are only through 2020.
and so will they commence one for 2021, like immediately following and then?
It's already been kicked off. We're not very far into it, and then their goal is to have that one done, and then the 2022 by the end of the year.
Great, okay.
Well, if it was more work for this last one, would it be a smaller fee, or is it a flat fee for these audit services?
That I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. I can inquire.
Because it's a new process.
Right.
Got it.
Okay.
One
And any other
different
questions?
question, yeah. Monroe
Well, let
County-
me ask, are there any other questions about the audit, so we don't have to come back to that one? Okay, great, go ahead.
Monroe County title, Monroe County land title, page 4. What property is that in regards to the 100-year title search?
It's on page 4, about midway through.
Here comes Jane.
I assume that was for the Clear Creek Culvert project. I don't have the claim in front of me, but I know that we had 100-year title search done just because that property is so old. 100 years, it was platted well before 100 years ago. But we have to acquire property for that Clear Creek project, so I believe that's probably what it is.
I'm sure you are right, but I was thinking it was for the lot up in the Crestmont community, is what I was thinking it was for. Because then we found out that it was not our property. But I'm sure you're right, because you do this every day. Okay.
Could we just get an email later on about that? Thank you.
For that amount.
Page 4, Monroe County land title.
It is for the last phase here that we're doing with regards to the culvert renovation up through behind Von Lee and across the Indiana Street into Indiana University. We did not ever reach the point of having to do an appraisal on that other piece of property, and we're not going to do an appraisal, ever. Well, we were just never going to do an appraisal on that property anyway. It had nothing, that was never going to be a feature of that lease agreement. And regardless of whether it was titled in the Utility Service Board's name or the City of Bloomington's name. So that was never, it could never possibly have been confused with that property because we were never going to do an appraisal there. That's okay, I'm clarifying it for you. Yep.
That's it. Are there any other questions about the standard invoices at this end? Megan?
I had just a general question. I noticed on page two, that we had a lot of staff members going to different conferences, and so I just thought it'd be interesting in a staff report sometime to hear about where everybody's been and what they've learned, and if that would be, something that they'll go attend next year. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I should say, a lot of times, people go to local conferences especially because they need the continuing education or hours in order to keep their licenses.
Great. So if there are no further questions, is there a motion to approve the standard invoices? And a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. The next item are the utility bills for a total of $26,841.96. Any questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? So moved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion and all those opposed? Motion passes. Next are the wire transfers in the amount of $525,924.62. Any questions on the wire transfers? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? So moved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Finally, we have the customer refunds for a total of $1,776.80. Any questions on the customer refunds? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? So moved. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Great, thanks, everybody. Next, we have Vic with the approval of the consent agenda.
Good evening, everyone. Vic Kelson, Utilities Director, for the record. We only have one item on the consent agenda tonight. It is to Electric Plus for the electrical relocation and installation of a fluoride skid at the Monroe plant. This is for $4,825. If there is no opposition from the board, this item will be approved as recommended by staff. Hearing no opposition, this contract is approved. Thank you.
Thanks, Vic. Next, we are going to have a bid opening for the Dillman Road wastewater treatment plant barge and electrical feeder improvements. And we have Dan Hudson.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Dan Hudson, Capital Projects Manager, and this project is for the Dillman wastewater treatment plant replacement of the 2 bar screens at the headworks, and also replacement of the electrical feeder lines. It's a big job, and we have 2 bidders. We'll open the first one, which is Graves Construction. The bids, there should be a base bid and an alternate bid, mandatory alternate bid. The mandatory alternate bid is for the replacement of an electrical conduit, maybe, if we need it. So the money will be there. It looks like the base bid is for $3,517,676.00. The alternate is $476,476.00. That's not correct? Hang on. Let me read this. Did you say 250,000? Excuse me, just one minute.
Sure.
I'm not sure if I can read. Yeah, and that's the alternate. Oh, yes,
Thank you very much for catching that.
yes. Well, he's the owner.
Yeah.
Excuse me. The base bid for Graves Construction is $3,767,676. Do you want me to read the
Please
digits
do.
to you? 3766676.
Okay.
Okay, that's the base bid. Okay. The alternate, I'll read the digits to you, it's easier, is 476476.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, the next one is from Thieneman Construction. And there's tabs. The base bid is $3,269,000, 0 cents and 0 cents. Alternate is $224,000 and 0 cents. I think I read that right. I can entertain questions.
Dan, I think at the last meeting, when we opened some bids, on the sheet that we got, there was a department estimate, and I thought that was pretty helpful, so maybe in the future, we could try
Yes.
to do that?
Yeah,
So,
I could do that.
Could you give the estimate for today?
I do have, yeah, I do have the estimate. The total cost, including the alternative one, is $4,650,000.
All right.
Okay, all right.
Okay, we look forward to hearing the report from you when it comes for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the request for the approval of resolution of bid acceptance and a contract award for the Fullerton Pike Phase 3 water main relocation, and that's Jane Fleeg. Hi, Jane.
Hello. Over there, not paying attention. Jane Fleeg for the record. I'm not sure what you got in your packet. I know that the resolution is in there. It's Resolution 2023-04. This is our request to allow us to enter into contract with Reed & Sons for the Fullerton Pike Phase 3 water main replacement project. They were the lowest responsible bidder at $426,386. And if you approve this, then we will forward the agreement to them and bring that back to you at the next meeting.
Questions on the resolution? None? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Great. Resolution passes. Thank you. Next, we have the request for an approval and agreement for on-call services with Henry P. Thompson Company, and that is Matt Havey.
Yeah,
Vic,
I'll
okay.
take this one. This is for on-call services with a company called the Henry P. Thompson Company. We have a ultraviolet disinfection system from a company. What's the name of the company, Chris? It'll come to me. Anyway. Yeah, anyway, we have a relatively new ultraviolet disinfection system at the Blucher Pool plant at the end of the process. The company that sold us that is the only company that can provide parts, and we had previously contracted with them for maintenance activities on that and had done on-call agreements with them. The problem that we've run into is that they are now holding the line on contract conditions that would limit their liability in the event that something went wrong while they were working at our plant to the cost of the contract, which is something certainly we don't want to accept and the city won't accept. So after doing research, we discovered that Henry P. Thompson Company in Indianapolis is a licensed and authorized maintenance contractor for that particular piece of equipment. So we have decided to go with them instead of going with the original vendor. And that's what this is. Trojan Technologies.
Are there any questions about this?
Well, I
Megan?
think you answered my question, because you said they're in Indianapolis, and what I'd seen in the contract that said they were in Ohio. And so I just wanted to make sure that if they're on call, if we needed them, that they would be able to come.
They have
at
offices.
times.
They have
Perfect.
offices in both states. I understand.
Then I figured it was something specialized, that maybe that's just where the people were. So thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Right, motion passes. Okay, the next is a request for approval and agreement with Bynum Fino and Associates for site remediation design at the Winston Thomas site, and that is Phil Peden.
Good evening, Phil Peden Engineering. Yes, this contract is for a contract for site remediation at the Winston Thomas site with Bynum Fino and Associates. It includes a topographic survey and site design for grading and demolition. And it's just really to get the site remediated back to a point to where we can use it for some other purpose, future purpose, whatever that might be. I think it's a goal of our utility as well as the board to remediate our old sites after the initial use has been complete and have that back to a state where it's ready to be used for a future purpose. So that's what we're trying to fulfill here, and welcome any questions.
Jeff?
Yeah, so my concern is that this expenditure continues our costs towards a new service center, which hasn't been approved by this board. We went ahead with the new floodplain mapping under the auspices that service would need to be performed regardless of what we're doing with the site. We went ahead and approved the financial analysis, knowing that was a key thing, a piece of information or set of information that we needed to be able to move ahead. I have some issues with that scope, but we moved ahead with that, and now I look at this contract, and in the scope of services Exhibit A, it's entitled, I quote, "Proposed CBU Service Center, Gordon Pike." So aside from that, I look at the scope of services, and I see demolition plan, remediation plan, drainage and grading plan. And to me, the intended future use of the site will dictate how those plans are created and what is actually in those plans. If that property meant to be a green space, those plans would be one thing. If it was meant to be a park, it would be another thing. If it was a equipment yard, it might be slightly different than an equipment yard with a service center. My point is that I see the scope of services as being heavily influenced by and quoted in, and let me just quote this because I don't have my computer and my printer wasn't working, but it says the scope of work includes blah 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 and schematic site layout based on previous study. That previous study is the master plan.
Sure.
So that's my concern, that we're continuing to make another expenditure for a purpose that hasn't been approved by the board.
Yeah, I think the comment I can just add is that this is, I guess, what we've seen as standard practice for the city when they have a piece of property that they plan on having additional different purpose for, like consider the hospital site, where they did a separate demo plan so that they could go ahead and get it cleared and then move forward with the design at a later date. We did share that master plan with Bynum Faneuil, so they had a general idea what the future use might be and then what parameter on the site would they need to include in their study when they created the design. So of course that was shared with Bynum Faneuil so they knew potential future uses. I think the goal was to condense this scope to where it was just to remediate the site so that we avoided some of your concerns, really. The idea was to separate this out so it was condensed only to getting the site back to a point where it could be used for whatever purpose in the future. But
If that's the scope and the plans are developed with that guidance and that knowledge that it could be any particular site, you know, that may be okay, but I think it's better to know how the site's going to be utilized before doing this work. I think it could take different directions and have different costs. I mean, if we have to vote on this now, I'll vote no because of those reservations, but that's just one person on this
yeah,
board.
I think it's a very good point.
I think Jim had something.
I think if I understand the point that you're making and your response, if this board turned down the use of it for a new site and it was used for some other city purpose, would we still be stuck with the $47,000 cost?
Could you say that again, please?
Did I make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. We're paying $47,000 for remediation. We haven't voted yet on the use. If we turn down the use and that piece of property is then used by the city for something else, do we get the $47,000 back?
I don't think so. Because what we're doing, this site was a wastewater treatment plant. So whatever future use the property has, regardless of whether it's a service center or anything else, if this property gets reused, we're responsible for getting rid of the wastewater treatment plant, the remnants of which are still there. And that's really what this is about.
So it's not going to be used for trash storage or?
No, the purpose,
It has one
is
purpose.
to get rid of the stuff that's there that isn't going to be there regardless of what the property's used for in the
Thank you.
future.
And I just want to say, I think Board Member Eman, you make some good points there. I think one thing that gave me some support in bringing this to the board was the fact that we had the Griffey plant for so many years down there where we didn't do anything with it, and then it ended up costing, I'd say millions of dollars to remediate that site, because if we'd have just went in, once we decided we weren't going to use it for that purpose and cleared it, it would have saved the utility quite a bit of money. So I think there's some stewardship of those assets that we need to, when they're done with their original purpose, to remediate the site. But I do think you make some good points, so it's up to the board.
Any other questions down here? No? All right, are we ready to, so is there a motion to approve the agreement with Bynum Faneuil and Associates? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, the next, we have a public hearing. So we have the Commonwealth Engineers presentation for the proposed sanitary lift station project, and we have Jeremy Hardy. And then this item will be up for public comment immediately following your presentation, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Quick introduction, Jeremy Hardy from Commonwealth Engineers. I'm currently the office manager of our new South Bend office, just opened up here recently. In the crowd, I have Matt Worth, Business Development Manager for your region down here in the south. The reason for this public hearing, recently we submitted to the Indiana Finance Authority for a request for funds. Currently, the city, its demographics, household income, meets a threshold with that funding agency to where you have an opportunity to maybe get some grant funds. So, long story short, but this time last year we were doing a study looking at a bunch of lift stations, which is part of the project. Went in to do a PER that was fundable through the Indiana Finance Authority. So that's gone through. Right now they're scoring all projects. Depending on where you score is the likelihood of getting grant opportunities. So if you don't fall in their fundable range, you're now second to those that fall within the fundable range. If you're in the fundable range, your chances go up. So it's a competition across the state. So there's no guarantees, but your opportunity is great given how you are below their threshold. So diving into the public hearing itself, this is a requirement of the PER, to which you have to host a public hearing, get public comment, provide that to the state so that they're just being transparent with the use of the finances. The purpose of the PER itself is just a continuation of the study we performed last year, looking at improved capacity and operation of some lift stations, providing backup power where it's not provided currently, replacing aging and or failed infrastructure and equipment. So you have underground facilities, but you also have equipment serving as pump stations, obviously. So it's a couple of factors playing a part that we looked at. Where we did a full evaluation, the Basswood lift station, Morningside Drive, Weymouth Lane, Park Ridge Road. I'll dive into some details, but just a quick summary of, we looked at the actual use as well as age of facilities there and backup power. The next one's here. There's a slew of sites that are rather small, and next one you'll see is a map of more of the peripheral of the city of Bloomington to where the 3rd Street underpass, that's a stormwater pumping station. That's pretty well in the heart of Bloomington. Then you have Cedarview Sims. You can read them, but in total there's about 14 lift stations where these are the ones that primarily we're looking at the controls. The pumps themselves are fine. It's, hey, the controls are so far gone and ultimately there's no backup power. So in a power outage, these are the numbers your utility staff would have to go out and actually pump out and keep up with during that outage. So again, here's the little map. So in the middle there is the 3rd Street underpass. So that's in the heart of the map there in the downtown area. And then meanwhile, the other lift stations are more of your development lift stations, all in the peripheral, both sides, west and east, and up to the north as well. Give you a chance to take that all in real quick. A real quick comment on Basswood on the west side there. We'll talk about it here in a second, but that has an opportunity to serve another lift station to where we can decommission and get rid of that additional maintenance. So there is that benefit there. And recently we talked about on the east side, Hyde Park Edward lift station. There might be an opportunity to back that out of the project and put that cost to better use because there's a means to decommission that and just be served by another lift station. So again, reducing the operation maintenance cost on the system itself. So a quick summary of the Basswood lift station, constructed in '89. Some aging facilities here, so you have poor control panel condition. There's no backup power. What we found a lot with these older pump stations is very small operating depth. So when you have the I&I issues that you have, there's no time to catch up with during a storm event when you have all that I&I getting into your sewer system. And then as you go further down, smaller wet well sizing, so a 6-foot diameter, and then the pumping rate, so at which we're getting the wastewater out of the pump station and into the next series of sewer collection system. So it was originally designed for 220 gallons a minute. We did a drawdown test. We had a range of one pump operating at 86 gallons a minute and one that was still well below the design rating of 200 gallons a minute. in which using some of the SCADA, the telemetry you have access to, we looked at pumping rates, run times, and equated that you approximately have 168 gallons a minute as a peak flow rate into that station. So that's ultimately what we got to keep up with. But looking to the future, Copper Beach is the other sub-basin that has a lift station that could be decommissioned and flow into this one. So while we upgrade this, looking at the option of, well, what would it take to facilitate that decommissioning, in which that would increase the impact on Basswood up to 460 gallons a minute. So one aspect of the project itself is access. So that's a very long, narrow lane, heavily wooded. So there's things that we got to consider in the design. This is more talking about the planning, but we are also in the design stage as well. So we're looking at means of access and being able to turn around if possible. It falls off in the backside there, so it's a very tight area for maintenance itself, as well as just getting back there to do a full construction. But you can see in the top right photo there, that's a valve vault. So a lot of corrosion on the piping itself. The structure itself is not too bad a shape. That's actually done pretty well over the years. But it's just the overall size and volume, keeping up with the peak storm events. That's really the impetus of this. First alternative we looked at is just hey, let's replace pumps, controls, all the various components inside the wet well. Again, the structure wasn't too bad a shape, and add a generator for backup power. Total cost of that option was just under $750,000. Option 2, build a brand new pump station, essentially, providing additional pumping of 320 gallons a minute. The 3.6 feet per second, so ultimately, if you achieve 3.5, you can resuspend solids and keep that line flush so you don't have buildup and lose capacity over the years. And then here, provide an 8-foot diameter wet well, and it's a small operating depth, but then alternative 2 is more of a, if you so choose in the future to get rid of Copper Beach, there's some upgrades you have to make it work, but structurally you have everything you need to make it happen. So that's where we have the future considerations. But ultimately just over $1 million would be the estimate to get that that option to work. The third option is actually taking it full force. Recently we actually did an amendment to design for this, so this is ultimately the selected plan is alternate number 3 here, and we've already prepped that amendment for the PER itself, but it is the whole new lift station, no different than alternate 2, aside from the pumping rate, so that we can actually keep up with flows coming from Copper Beach. Again, we'll have an operating depth at 3.5 feet, which fits well within the standards that you have for lift station designs. The reason for the force main extension itself is where it's currently tied into does not have the capacity. It's just an 8-inch line, which anything less than 400 gallons a minute you can assume you might have the capacity for, but anything over 400 definitely need to go to the next structure, and ultimately you have an interceptor just outside there of that development. And this estimate was just over $1.3 million. Moving on to the next lift station site, there's a lot of similarities. Control panels, bad shape, piping, corroded. It's a bad environment in the sewer system. And again, surcharging, the operating depth. I know this one for sure has issues with I&I, and it's a much older lift station and a much smaller lift station. Basswood was a 6-foot diameter. This one's 5-foot diameter. So once you actually get hit with a rain event, very quickly you are underwater and you're playing catch up right from the get-go. The design flow rate was 95 gallons a minute. During our drawdown, we saw 56 to 82 gallons a minute. So very low flow rates. And here we have an aging force main 4-inch cast, whereas due to the time period of when you actually had your installation, Basswood has PVC, which is very good for sewer systems. Cast iron is not a very good material, long-lasting material, especially for a sewer system. Future conditions, it's a fully developed subdivision, so we don't really have to consider, hey, where's additional growth coming from, as much as let's keep up with the peak flows. One consideration is the velocities, is making sure we achieve much higher range so that we don't have that sediment buildup and losing that capacity over time. Again, on this one, it's aged very well, structure-wise, but the internal components are highly corroded. I believe if you can tell from the top left picture there, I think the maintenance department has replaced valves over time, but ultimately from a capacity standpoint, you need the additional volume to take that hit during the wet weather with your I&I conditions, and keep up with peak flow with the larger pumps. And the idea with the where it would be a replacement is just install adjacent to the site while it's still in operation. So alternative one is the straightforward approach of replace the pumps, improve your peak rating, have that ability to resuspend solids, have backup power, replace the force main. HDPE there, that's more commonly used now, just from an installation perspective. We're looking at directional drilling as the option for installation. For this option would be just shy of $1 million. Option two, this one shows a little more about the route. Currently, your force main route goes between two homes up to the north there. We propose just following the tree line and then ultimately sidewalk area next to the tennis courts, ultimately connecting the same point, but avoiding that break in the future right next to the house. That's a liabilities perspective there. But ultimately, this would consider same pumping rate as the last option, go to a 6-foot diameter wet well. It's not as big as the basswood because we're not talking about that much flow in comparison. Operating depth is still kind of low. We still have a requirement that we can't let it sit for more than 30 minutes detention time, so we got to keep that in consideration. And again, an HDPE force main. This one's just around $1.1 million for this option. One thing we're also considering, just to help find that better point in the pump curve during our design right now, is we're looking at what's the cost difference to go to a 6-inch, just so that we can get a better efficiency for your power usage. Weymouth Lane, this is an older pump station as well. This one is a confined space entry issue. These are old Cantech pump stations where you have a wet well and then you have pumps and your electrical all in a below grade vault that over time becomes a problem. Again, no backup power. This one's a very small pump station, only serving a very few amount of homes comparison to what we've been talking about. Design flow rate back in the original inception, 20 gallons a minute. We're only seeing 9 gallons a minute of flow coming through there. It's an old 4-inch cast. With the uphill shot that this has and that terrain back there, likely you have sediment buildup in the lines, which just packs in over time, so you're losing that flow area, and ultimately you have that exposure inside the force main, so the chances of failure, it keeps increasing over time. There's no more additional flow to be considered, so what it is today is what it is tomorrow for what we're considering. Consideration here is the heavily overgrown areas around the pump station. That will have to be cleared out for construction, and that's been considered. Ultimately, this one and Park Ridge are very similar in nature. What we're considering, for the very fact that we're taking away that screening, is a nice vinyl fence to go back up around, so you're being nice to the neighbors, not putting some chain link fence in for them.
Be careful with those trees ahead and clearing those.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of it just looks like shrubs that have just continued to grow and grow and grow and not really be a tree. I remember that at my house, trimming that up before. So there's really only one option here, and that is dig it out, put a new pump station in. Ultimately, the use we'll have of the wet well will just be more so a junction at the end of the day, just a normal manhole. Given the tight conditions, going to a standard precast wet well valve vault would just become problematic ultimately. So the consideration is using fiberglass stations with an integral valve vault so we can stay on a very tight footprint here. But ultimately, this option itself, using a 3-inch force main, so we're using grinder pumps, so that we have to apply for alternative technical standards ultimately, but it's been used commonly throughout the state for small diameter if you have the grinder pumps, and allows achieving the velocities to keep the solid suspended throughout the force main. And this here, we're just over $850,000. Park Ridge Road went in about the same time, so repeat of all the conditions we talked about for Weymouth. So these are very similar, and from a design perspective, since we are in design, we are using the same materials, same pumps, so that when we have a backup, that backup serves 2 pump stations versus having a backup for one, a backup for the other one. So helps with not having too much on the shelf. One could fit either station, so that helps with just your stock. Again, this one has a lot of shrubbery, trees around the area, so that'll be a lot of cleanup in that area. Again, the plan is to make it nice, and obviously they have the option to do shrubs around it in the future, but obviously we can't keep that in place for excavation. Very similar price, just given the very similar nature in the force main lengths. $858,000. The other one was $861,000, so just very tight on the numbers there. Controls and backup. So some of these lift stations, obviously looking at a new generator just for the fact of how the size of the pump station. Where we're looking at plugs is just, hey, it's a very small station. We have time to go out there and connect it. Whereas your 3rd Street lift station, obviously in a storm event, that's your storm pump station. So you need it to be live and well if power goes out. Cedar View, Sims, Night Ridge, those are larger lift stations that lend itself to the need of a new generator. The option 1, 2 differences, you'll see number 2 come up here in a second, is use of a VFD. Does it make sense to use VFDs? And ultimately, just talking to staff, 1, the parts and pieces, replacements, and maintenance is more costly on the option 1 with using VFDs, but your standard control package is more common to your maintenance staff, and these are smaller stations, so ultimately what trues out to be the case is use the standard control system, and we'll get to the cost here in a second. So number 2, that's the difference there, is we got rid of VFDs. This is just a standard control panel. That's the lone difference between the 2 options. So summarizing the cost here, so your controls and backup power improvements, so your option 1 is, hey, let's use VFDs. That gets you $1.1 million. Hey, let's back that off to your standard controls, how you're set up across the system, just shy of $900,000. So a good cost savings, and it sticks with how you guys are doing business. With the Basswood lift station, we have a consideration here with option 3 versus option 1. Option 1 is just a standalone, hey, take care of its station itself and not improve on your detention time and improving your management of peak flows. Option 2 kind of plays in part with option 3 because it paves the way if you ever want to go in the future to decommission Copper Beach. You can make some improvements, whereas option 3 is let's just take care of that now. That way, when Copper Beach does get transferred over, you are already prepared for that. So that's the additional cost. And then Morningside Drive, option 1 is just replace pumps, controls, versus option 2, a brand new pump station. Weymouth Lane and Park Ridge, again, very similar nature on the numbers. That is just a brand new pump station. So the ultimate cost for the project is just over $5 million. So we've selected option 2 for the controls and backup power. Basswood, we are paving the way for decommissioning of Copper Beach. Morningside, brand new pump station, gives you more detention time, management of those peak flows. And Weymouth and Park Ridge, obviously just a complete replacement, given the age back in the 60s of their installation. Okay, briefly touching on the environmental impacts, because we do have to talk about that within the report and as part of the public hearing. Really, there are no adverse effects with all these various factors: your soils, farmland, geology, floodways, hydrology, wetlands, air quality. Air quality is only a construction matter, which there's provisions that the contractor has to follow. Plants and animals, no negative impact. Historic, architectural, and archaeological sites, no impact. National natural landmarks, no impact. And your open space and recreational opportunities will neither create nor destroy. And the only one that would have came into play is the Morningside Drive site itself, but we're ultimately staying away from touching all that open space. And with that, I will open up the questions.
Any questions from the board? And then if not, or shall we open for public comment first?
Questions from the board and then public.
Okay, questions from the board. All right, no questions from the board. Are there any questions from the public or public comment? Well,
Can't help myself.
Oh.
I have to ask in regards to the,
go ahead, Randy, come on up to the,
Identify yourself.
I have to ask just from an environmental standpoint, Randy Cassidy, just public. When we're looking at the generator aspect, given the residential neighborhood of where we're putting some of these, is there a possibility they could utilize natural gas as opposed to diesel in order to keep the possibility of any contamination?
Yes. That's that question.
so can you repeat the question?
Yep. So the question was the use of natural gas for the generators. That is the basis of design currently, is use of natural gas. Where we are unable to seek connection to natural gas, we would then consider going to LP. So diesel is the last choice in the matter.
Great. Any other questions, comments? Great. Okay.
I have a question about that. When you use natural gas, and I'm always thinking of the worst case scenario, but if we're having one of the reasons we have an electrical failure is some natural disaster, or we'd have a storm, or the power company would lose its ability to generate. So that would work with you'd have natural gas, and assuming you'd have the control in place and that sort of thing, and that system works. But if you're in an earthquake situation, then you're going to have a disruption in natural gas supply. Sometimes it makes more sense then, in my mind, that if you had the fuel supply close at hand. But I don't know how you guys look at those kinds of threats and assess, the possibility of an earthquake and how severe it would be.
No, that's a good question, because you're definitely in that area. So the way we look at it, so not 10 state standards, but the administrative code, we're required, one, to assure you have a backup pump. You are to have a means for backup power, and provisions for that is a plug, which we talked about for your smaller pump stations, or a generator. There's also provisions where you can add a secondary feed line. So if you have a different power grid, you can actually connect two separate power grids, or same power grid. That would be a means to suffice the Indiana code. But for that's almost like a hurricane came through, and you just can't plan for that situation ultimately. Now, if that's ultimately concern, yes, you could do the liquid propane and have that on site, so where it's isolated. But then again, something could happen that too, if it's a bad enough situation. If it impacts natural gas lines, what's it going to do over here? So it's a chasing the tail type of thing at some point.
Of course, if you went with that, you have to resupply it.
Yeah.
Whether it be LP or diesel, either one.
Yeah, because that's the other thing, is what likely cuts off your supply for natural gas. You may not have access to get to the site to refuel. So, yeah, good question though.
I just wondered about the current engineering thoughts about those kind of risks.
Yeah. No, we try to plan for, okay, what if this happens? especially like with the design considerations, whereas we're using some old data to plan out what kind of peak flows. You don't design to that because there's all these other factors you got to consider of just its operation, but then you go, well, given what volume I have available, what sense does it make to thread the needle versus there's always going to be that one storm that just is more than you've experienced in the last couple of years that the data we're looking at. So there's some other factors we throw on there as well.
Thanks.
Yes.
Just to follow up, I agree, our proximity to the New Madrid Fault and the fact that Evansville is going to be treated differently than Fort Wayne and we lie somewhere in between, it would be good to have a recommendation for best practices in this region regarding the threat of, say, the big one for this area, whatever that is.
Right.
If it's just a few bricks falling off the building, or if it's actually forecast to break some natural gas lines, it would be good to know to help us plan.
That'd be a good follow-up with the natural gas company, because ultimately they're analyzing those threats too, and I guess you as well as a utility for your underground infrastructure, it's the same game as they have. So yeah, it'd be good, a good source ultimately to talk about because they go beyond the reaches here, I would assume, and serving possibly closer to where they have to really analyze that.
Yeah, where do we fall?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, great.
Okay,
Jeremy,
thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any old business from the board? The only old business I have is, Vic, will we be seeing the flow chart at this meeting, or will that be
That'll be at the next meeting.
at the next meeting? Okay, perfect. Any old business from staff? New business from the board? New business from staff? We did not have any subcommittees meet this time, and I believe the next subcommittee meets, is it
Next time.
the 24th? And which subcommittee is that? Environmental. Okay, great. And then staff reports.
Hi, I have a few of them. First one is, you'll notice behind me that the second television has finally arrived. We hope to have it installed as soon as the contractor can get here to get everything set up and plugged into the whole CAT system. So soon we will have it all completed. It's been a long slog. The second thing is Kaylee Bollinger, who is a relatively new operator at the Dillman plant, passed the wastewater Class 1 license exam, which is great news. And she will be getting the license right away, so she's completed all of her in-service time, so she'll be licensed. Last week, Jason Winning, who's our industrial pretreatment coordinator, and Carson Swafford, who works with Jason, attended the WIT-TEC conference, which is an industrial operators association for wastewater treatment, and they gave a presentation there about the alcohol manufacturers general permit program that has been in development here for several years, and that we're getting ready to deploy. So that was good to have them presenting there. We also, this week, the Indiana section American Waterworks Association conference is in Indianapolis, and several of us will be presenting there. So we'll have 3 more presentations at that conference as well, covering everything from service line inventory projects to process control and data application. So appreciate the efforts of our team to get out there and talk about the things we're doing. That's all I have to say.
Well, that's great, and congratulations to everybody from getting even their papers and their talks even approved. I'm assuming there's a selection process too. So
There is, yes.
So good. That's a lot of extra work, and so congratulations to those folks. Would there be any way after the conference to at least see the PowerPoints? Or
Yeah, we can share the slides.
yeah, I mean, I don't think we have to have full presentations, but there might be something that the board would be interested in seeing, and
We'll be happy
and
to.
It's great to hear that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any petitions or communications from outside public? Great. Hearing none, then is there a motion to adjourn? All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Enjoy the weather.